I see it as recreative. It's creative on my part, but in the great scheme of things, people who write original prose are superior, and I'm recreating their vision. What I want to do in my translation is to give you an experience which corresponds to my experience of the text when I read the original Russian. And if you get something of the feeling, something of the thought that I have when I read it, then I've succeeded in giving you this translation.
Hey, I'm John.
I'm Corey,
And this is The Passage,
the podcast where authors break down their favorite pieces of writing
taking you behind the scenes from the first spark of inspiration
to the final edits and everything in between. Hey, Corey. John, what's going on?
Today, we are going to do things slightly differently. Typically, we would record the intro with the guest on the video call with us, but we had technical issues, so we're recording this after the fact.
Who is our guest? Who did we talk to?
Before I reveal that, let me ask you a question. Would you agree that Russian literature has a reputation?
Yeah, that's why I don't read a lot of it.
What would you say that reputation is?
Hard, challenging.
Hard. Yeah.
All the character names sound the same.
Yeah, everyone has the same name.
Everything's 800 pages.
The books are super long, dense, difficult. I am not an expert on Russian literature, though I've read a handful of the big classics, and I would say that reputation is unfounded. It's untrue in a lot of cases. War and Peace is maybe my favorite book of all time. Crime and Punishment is a real page turner. It's like 700, 800 pages, but you can read it really quickly. So I think that reputation is not necessarily true. But late last year, I picked up Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov and found that one was actually incredibly difficult. It took me like 4 months. It was also one of the strangest books I've ever read. In the end, I ended up loving it a lot. And I think that's a testament to the book itself, but also to the translation that I read, which felt really tactile and lively. That translation was done by our guest today, Michael Katz. Michael is the CV Star Professor Emeritus of Russian and Eastern European Studies at Middlebury College. He's translated more than 20 Russian novels, including Crime and Punishment, Notes from the Underground. His latest translation is Dostoevsky's The Idiot, which is due out this summer. And I am super, super excited to have him on the show.
This was a really good conversation, John. I think it's an interesting one for the podcast simply because you don't really think about translators as being creative writers in a sense. And in some ways they are, in some ways they aren't. We get into that a little bit with Michael, but yeah, let's play the episode.
Cool. Enjoy. Michael, if you could set up the passage a little bit, what might readers like to know if they're hearing this for the first time?
First of all, Dostoevsky likes describing characters' dreams. In Karamazov, each of the three characters has a dream or a vision, and this is Dmitri's dream. He's being accused of patricide, having murdered his father. We don't know whether he's done it or not, but he's on trial for it, and this is the beginning of the legal process. And he is exhausted by the interrogation. He curls up on a bench and he falls fast asleep. And Dostoevsky writes, he had a strange dream, utterly out of keeping with the time and place. He was somewhere out on the steppe where he'd been stationed a long time ago, and a peasant was driving him through the slush in a cart with a pair of horses. Mitya felt cold. It was early November, and snow was falling in large, wet flakes. It melted immediately as soon as it hit the ground. The peasant drove along swiftly, boldly snapping his whip. He had a long, fair beard. The driver wasn't an old man, perhaps 50, wearing a gray peasant's homespun coat. There was a village not far off. He could pick out the very black huts. Half of them had burned down, and there were only a few charred beams sticking up. Standing along the road leading out of the village were lots of peasant women, a whole row of them, all thin and wan, with brownish faces. There was one in particular at the edge, such a bony woman, tall, looking about 40, but perhaps only 20, with a long, thin face. In her arms she held a little child who was crying. Her breasts must have dried up with no milk left in them. The baby was crying, holding out his bare little arms, his little fists, blue from the cold. Why are they crying? What are they crying for? He asks, briskly flying by. It's the babe, the driver replies. It's the babe crying. And Mitya is struck by the fact that he says it in his own way, the peasant way, babe, and not baby. He likes the peasant calling it a babe. It seems as if there's more pity in it. But why is he crying? Mitya persists like a fool. Why are his little arms bare? Why don't they wrap him up? The babe's chilled to the bone. His little clothes are frozen and they don't warm him. But why is it so? Why? Foolish Mitya persists. They're poor people, burned out. They haven't a crust of bread. They're begging because they're burned out. No, no, Mitya still seems not to understand. Tell me, why are these poor mothers standing there? Why are the people poor? Why is the babe poor? Why is the steppe barren? Why don't they all embrace and kiss? Why don't they sing songs of joy? Why are they so dark from black misery? Why don't they feed the babe? He feels that although his questions are unreasonable and senseless, he still wants to ask them, and he has to pose them in just that way. He feels that an emotion of sweet tenderness is rising up in his heart, one he's never experienced before, and that he wants to weep. He wants to do something for everyone so that the babe won't cry anymore, so that the dark, dried up mother of the babe will no longer cry, so that no one will shed any more tears from this moment forth. And he wants to do this all at once, without delay, in spite of all obstacles, with all of the Karamazov recklessness.
The first thing that I'm struck by, and because it's always so difficult to convey when we're about to go into a dream state, and I love how simply this is set up. He had a strange dream, utterly out of keeping with the time and place. Because this is a translation, I think I listen to it and I read it in a little bit of a different way. The first thing that really sticks out to me is the passage where it's the babe, the driver replies, it's the babe crying, and Mitch is stuck by the fact that he says it in his own way, the peasant way, babe and not baby.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder, was that immediately part of the translation challenge for you?
Absolutely.
Can you give us a little bit of insight
Sure.
into how that would work?
Russian word for child is ditya, D-I-T-Y-A in transliteration. But the peasant says dityo, D-I-T-Y-O, with an accent on it. And the literal translation is the child is crying, not the babe or baby, but the child is crying. I looked back to see what other translators have done. Constance Garnett, 1912, says babe, B-A-B-E. Magashak, 1954, uses the dialect babby, B-A-B-B-Y. Macduff, who's Scottish, uses the word bairn, B-A-I-R-N, which is baby in Scots. And Pavir Valahonsky, the team, say wee one, which to my ear is laughable, the wee one.
Right.
I looked in Roget's thesaurus and I found all sorts of alternatives: child, baby, infant, tot, little one, tyke, nipper, babykins, little bugger, cherub. And I thought about it long and hard, and I thought the best way to do it would be to contrast the normal neutral form, baby, with the peasant way of saying it, And I think Ditsyo, Babe, does it the best.
And that's
Michael-
in line with the first English translation, correct?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So she got it right.
Yes. She did. She was good. She had good instincts.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't know Russian all that well.
Mm-hmm.
And as I look at her translation now, I see inaccuracies
Mm.
and infelicities, but one has to hand her a tremendous debt of gratitude. She translated over 70 Russian books
Wow.
Yeah.
and introduced Russian literature to the English speaking world, British and American.
Michael, I'm curious, when I emailed you to come talk to us, you got back to me almost right away with that passage. Why that one, why did it come to you so quickly?
Well, I think it shows Dostoevsky's style
Mm-hmm.
is intense writing. What the passage does best is expresses what I call a crescendo of interrogation.
Hmm.
He starts with, why is the baby crying? And he ends with, why is the world unjust? Why is there poverty? Why is there grief? And he goes higher and higher and higher each sentence. And it reaches this crescendo of wonderful emotion. And in pure Russian style, his result is an enormous upsurge of warm affection. And he wants to do something, a Karamazov recklessness, he says. Let me do something to make things better for everybody.
When a passage feels like it has such high importance for the book itself, for the sort of themes, this is one of the key moments in the story. Does that put more pressure on you as a translator? Do those passages feel more challenging to translate because there's so much nuance, there's so much significance? How do you approach the different parts of the book? Was this a difficult passage for you to translate?
It was a wonderful passage to translate. It is difficult, and I show it to a number of people. I have a native speaker whom I pass all my manuscripts by, and then I have someone who doesn't know Russian, but whose English is superb, and I show him the draft, and he makes comments and suggestions. And between the two of them, I get an expert reader who knows the language, an expert reader who doesn't know the language, and I balance their suggestions and accept some and don't accept others. But this kind of passage is also the most enjoyable to translate because it's so wonderful.
I find it really interesting what you just said, that you have a native Russian speaker as a kind of early reader. Can you talk about the difference between your Russian and a native Russian speaker's Russian?
She has a knack and a feeling for words. When I look in a dictionary, there may be 3 or 4 different meanings of a word, and I have to choose which I think fits in the passage best. She has a feeling, an intuition of which word works. I don't have an intuition. I'm a language teacher and a language student, so I consider the alternatives and I say, which one is best? And that I use my head. She uses her heart. And she chooses one that fits what she feels. And I think that the combination of head and heart is what makes my translations good.
That's really interesting and gets to a point of why we wanted to have a translator on the show. We talked to a wide variety of writers, and I think translator might sort of live a bit on the periphery of what we might call creative writing. Do you consider the act of translating to be a creative act for you?
I see it as recreative.
Yeah.
It's creative on my part, but in the great scheme of things, people who write original prose are superior, I guess. and I'm recreating their vision. What I want to do in my translation is to give you an experience which corresponds to my experience of the text when I read the original Russian. And if you get something of the feeling, something of the thought that I have when I read it, then I've succeeded in giving you this translation.
Did you read this particular book in Russian before English or English before Russian?
No, English before Russian.
Okay.
I read these books when I was about 15
Okay.
and started studying Russian when I was 16 and began to read Dostoevsky when in the original when I was 21. It took a couple of years to learn Russian well enough in order to
Yeah.
read Karamazov.
And I'm curious what that process is like coming to the book in its original once you have a kind of feel for it in translation. How do you reset your mind to absorb what Dostoevsky had originally written?
Well, I think you have to be open. You can't have such fixed opinions of who the characters are, what they look like, how they speak, how they think, what they dream. You have to feel open to hearing it in the original and modifying whatever views you had when you formed your first opinion by reading it in translation.
Do you remember anything in particular that struck you when you did go to the original as being very different from the English, or something the original translator hadn't captured? Because Dostoevsky's a really strange kind of writer. And one of the things that I think makes it so strange is the cadence or the grammar or the rhythm of the sentences.
I want you to have that experience, but it's only by reading a review or hearing that somebody likes my version and why they like the version that I know whether I've succeeded.
You ever go back and read your own translations and think, yeah, I nailed that one?
Well, I don't feel I nailed it. I feel like I made a good effort. And sometimes I like passages more than others. I do. And I have just been asked by Norton to revise my Notes from Underground, which was the first Dostoevsky text I ever translated. And I did that, and they're issuing a new revised version of it. And I thought, it's not bad. I made little changes in it along the way as I was revising it, but I thought that was a difficult text, maybe one of the most difficult texts I translated. And I thought, didn't do such a bad job. But it took a long time to translate that text. There were sometimes I puzzled over a few sentences, and that was a day's work.
What made it so difficult? What makes any translation more difficult
Well, the
than
first
another?
30 pages are philosophical and abstract and don't have any characters or any action in it. The second 70 pages are more like a novel, and they have 3 separate episodes that the underground man experiences. And the abstract philosophical part was very difficult to catch his meanings, what he wanted the underground man to say as he's explaining why he's trapped in his underground.
Michael, John and I both have publishing backgrounds, but I'm curious because I never really dealt with classic translations before. When you say that Norton wants to issue a revised version of an original translation from you, why? What triggers a new translation of a work?
I think it's for a new critical edition that they will have me submit new essays in support of the text.
It sounds like you did go back to the translation itself and
I did. Sure.
Looked and said, okay, here's an opportunity for me to make some updates if I feel that they're warranted. What does that process look like? Is that just the length of time that has passed and you feel that your skills as a translator have evolved?
Well, I think I translate early in the morning,
Mm.
and it's like having a private Russian lesson every morning before I start my day. And I've been doing that since 1980. So 40 plus years of translating, I think, have improved my skills. So I'm looking at that text again 40 plus years later.
Why
Michael,
early in the morning?
It's the way I work.
Hmm.
No telephone calls, no emails, no disturbances, no cats or dogs to be let in or out.
can you describe that process? Like, what does it look like to sit down and work on a translation?
Well, I'm sitting here now and I have the Russian text in front of me. I keep 2 or 3 of the other versions nearby, which I
Interesting.
look at on occasion, mostly to see how not to do it, but sometimes I pick up tips from them. And I think, in a sense, translation is an enterprise that builds on one's predecessors. If
Mhm.
they found a word, even Pavel Volokonsky, if they found a wonderful word that encapsulates the Russian better than what I've come up with, I take their word.
Mhm.
I use it. And I say in my preface or in my acknowledgments that we build on each other's work,
Mhm.
and that's what I do.
Are you working at the level of word to word or sentence by sentence or paragraph at a time?
It's sentence by sentence. I
Okay.
read a whole sentence. I understand I've read it recently. I
Mhm.
understand the whole work, the paragraphs, but as I'm translating it, I read through a whole sentence and get that in mind. And grammar teachers would be delighted. I look for the subject and the main verb, and I start with the framework of the sentence and then add the clauses.
You approach it very technically, like that.
I do.
And do some sentences come easier than others?
Absolutely.
You find yourself sort of flying through a few of them, and then you hit a
Absolutely. Yeah. Dialogue is the easiest and
why?
the most fun as people are exchanging ideas, insulting each other.
Right.
It's easy to do that kind of translating.
Mm-hmm.
I hear the voices in my head of the characters speaking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever get to a point where you are stuck on a passage? This is really difficult. I'm going to continue on and I will come back to a part where I'm in a rut.
I do, and I ask my native speaker, or if all else fails, there's a listserv of Russian speakers, Russian experts, and I'll put a question on the listserv and say, I'm stuck with this passage. Anybody have any wisdom? And usually within a day, I have 4 or 5 answers. Not all the same, but I read them through and decide which one fits best.
You really are interpreting in a
Yes.
lot of ways.
That's why Google Translate is not so good,
Mm-hmm.
because it assumes that there's an equivalent
Mm-hmm.
in English for every Russian word, and there isn't always. So you have to choose between the gradations, the subtleties,
Mm-hmm.
nuances of a word. And Google doesn't do that so well.
And what are the particular challenges with Dostoevsky?
Well, he has certain favorite words, and it can get very boring if you're reading a translation. Nothing in Dostoevsky happens gradually.
Mm-hmm.
Everything happens suddenly. And he uses the word suddenly innumerable times.
Mm-hmm.
In Russian, there are 2 or 3 synonyms for suddenly. In English, all we can say is all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
instead of suddenly, but that's not much of an alternative. The other thing that he does is say something is strange. When Dostoevsky thinks something is strange, it's off the continuum, since most of Dostoevsky is strange.
Mm-hmm.
and you have to figure out what to do about repetition. Some translators insist on repeating every word that Dostoevsky uses. If he uses the same word, they'll repeat it over and over. I try to vary it, except if the words are semantically loaded, in which case I use the same word because Dostoevsky is insisting on something. Strange is one of the words that I don't change because he uses it to indicate something that's really weird.
Is this all your own trial and error? Did you have a mentor that was a translator? Do you work much with other translators and exchange, here is how I work, this is how I approach a tricky situation? How much do you learn from other people, and how much have you simply developed on your own?
Mostly developing on my own.
Intentionally?
No, there weren't any organizations at the time of translators.
Yeah.
Now there are more, and I've spoken to some of those groups and pick up ideas from other translators, but really I worked my own method out by myself over the years.
What do you think accounts for the continued interest in these books that are 160 something years old?
Well, Dostoevsky, I think, puts his finger on some of the problems that we still have. Mental states that are not normal, intense passion, deep questions of belief and unbelief. These are the things that motivated me when I was 15 and started reading him in English. And those are the questions that still plague me. And I interact with these characters still and think about these questions. These are different questions than Tolstoy, for example. Tolstoy writes about love and marriage, divorce, family, children. Dostoevsky doesn't write about any of those things. He writes about the soul and whether there is a God and whether there is justice on the earth and the meaning of Christ in society. Those questions continue to fascinate readers, not just adolescent readers, although most people who read Dostoevsky start in adolescence and keep reading.
Is it in your head to make it readable for a modern audience? I mean,
Yes.
would your version sound strange to a 1930s ear?
I suspect so. The same reason that Constance Garnett's translation read a bit archaic and she uses obsolete terms. Translations get older and they don't live forever. 20 or 30 years seems to be the lifespan of a translation. The language is constantly changing.
Michael, we'll ask you some quick questions. Give us
Okay.
the sort of first thing that pops in. What's a word in Russian that you're most frustrated doesn't exist in English?
Умиление. The word is, in fact, in the passage that I read, when Dmitri feels this great rush of tenderness after he has his crescendo and he comes back to earth and he feels this warmth, this intimacy with the people who are suffering. And the word is usually translated as tenderness, but that doesn't do it. It's usually after some sort of emotional climax. And then the relaxation comes.
Michael, if you could choose one project, what would be the ultimate translation project?
War and Peace.
What's the most valuable skill for a great translator to have beyond knowing multiple languages?
A good ear.
What's the best book that has yet to be translated into English?
You mean well translated?
Sure.
War and Peace.
I think I know who they should call to do that work.
No, I'm too old for that one.
What's one aspect of translation you think you're particularly good at?
Well, Dostoevsky uses long, complicated sentences, and they have to be divided into shorter units. And that has to be done without destroying the meaning of his passage. And I think I have a good sense of how to divide his sentences into smaller pieces and not lose the meaning.
Excellent. Michael, thank you so
Okay.
much for coming on the show and speaking with us.
You're welcome.
Thanks again, Michael.